Greg the golfer's quest to hit the ball 300 yards. I met Greg in the summer of 2005 on the edge of a driving range, warming up before a golf tournament held by a large logistics company. I had been a physiotherapist for 2 years and found myself going down a strange career path that involved working for free under a small tent on a golf course, trying to assess, educate, and recruit golfers as clients to build my caseload at a makeshift physiotherapy clinic. I learned a lot about golf, but I learned more about the motivation and the thought processes of successful middle-aged and older men. It was an exercise in how to make an impact on busy people in a short period of time. What you said had to be meaningful to the person in front of you. I was a trained healthcare professional from Canada who ended up receiving sales training in a small town in Pennsylvania, followed by providing golf performance work in Vancouver. My training prepared me perfectly for my first encounter with Greg, a 56-year-old sales manager, with a need to impress but a low back that did not cooperate with him. He was about 6'3", 230 pounds, with minimal muscle definition in his upper body and a bit of a spare tire around his waistline. He had a bravado around me because I was 2 inches taller than him, 30 years younger, and I knew a lot about the game he loved. I was offering a quick assessment and possibly a brief treatment before Greg went off to golf for 4 hours. My quick screening was intended to help him that day and hopefully intrigue him enough to come and see me in the clinic for a more thorough evaluation. In 10 minutes or less, I had to figure out what motivated him, look for restrictions in his movement, then explain to him how improving aspects of his body would help him achieve his goals. Greg wanted to hit the golf ball 30 yards further and enter a long drive competition before he turned 60. His trunk was stiff, his hips were stiffer, and he had a fixation on his club head speed that translated into him having a perpetually sore low back. Greg's awkward machismo almost required him to hit the ball as hard as he could every time. It quickly became evident to me that I could not help him with his back if I talked to him about anatomy. So I showed him how improving his rotation could translate into more yardage, a goal meaningful to him. I could tell Greg was intrigued with what I had to say, but he got pulled back to his foursome and headed off to the tee box after our 10 minutes together. He disappeared for 2 months after our initial encounter, but then proceeded to come in and out of my life for the following 15 years. In the early fall of 2005, Greg came in to see me for a 3-hour evaluation of his body and his golf swing. We went through him head to toe and broke down how his flexibility in each area of his body affected the power of his golf swing, and how that, in turn, affected the health of his low back. We then created a 3-month plan of weekly visits to limber him up and teach him to move more efficiently, with the end goal of hitting the golf ball 300 yards. Greg was a quirky guy who I got to know well over our initial 3 months together, an experience that opened my eyes to how mental baggage can drive physical pain. During our sessions, I learned Greg had a challenging upbringing with his father, a demasculinizing divorce from his wife, and went through a professional battle in his attempt to climb the corporate ladder as a single man in his mid-50s. He had a lot he felt he had to compensate for, and golf was the fixation he created to help himself feel more worthy. He was working with a counselor to deal with a variety of issues, but he also brought his emotionally charged self into our physical therapy sessions. We talked as I worked on his body, and I slowly taught him how to move much more efficiently. His back improved, he started hitting the ball further, and he kept talking about entering a long drive competition, but to my knowledge, never did. Greg disappeared from my caseload for about 4 years, but managed to find me again at my new clinic located in a personal training gym. 1 year after I had learned the new skill of IMS dry needling. He came in to see me as emotionally charged as ever and still fixated on the follow-through movement with his left hip I taught him. His back bothered him again, but he seemed proud of how far he could hit the ball as a 60-year-old. He felt the need to show off even while he asks for my help. His anxiety about his X-ray results was evident. He had gone to his family doctor to talk about his low back and came away with a radiology report that said multi-level degenerative disc disease in his lumbar spine and moderate osteoarthritis in both of his hips. His doctor told him to stop golfing if he wants his back to feel better, but Greg was unprepared to walk away from something so wrapped up with his identity. I talked Greg off the ledge, explaining that the results of his x-rays were not directly correlated to his pain. The discomfort he felt was based more on the muscular and fascial tension he held in his hips. His subconscious bracing of the deep muscles in his butt compressed his hips, putting strain on his back, and more importantly, limited the internal rotation movement he needed for his follow-through movement in his swing. I explained I learned a new technique called intramuscular stimulation, or IMS, and that it was effective for releasing this type of bracing tension. I suggested to him that the intervention would likely help both his back and his golf game, so he decided to give it a try. Greg is the type of high-strung, tight, compressed person that tends to have a hard time with IMS, but also experiences incredible results if he can tolerate it. Greg was nervous about the idea of me sticking needles into his hips, and he attempted to keep up his bravado with me. I walked him through everything he needed to know and proceeded to poke a 75mm needle deep into his left gluteus medius muscle. Greg let out a yelp that could be heard across the gym as he leapt 3 feet off the table in astonishment of the intense squeeze feeling he experienced. His eyes bugged out as he laughed the words, "What the hell was that?" I explained it was a deep muscle in his butt contracting strongly, and I wanted to do the same thing to 3 more muscles on each of his hips. Sweating and nervous, Greg consented to me trying a different muscle, but again ended up with him literally jumping off the bed like he saw a ghost. I didn't want to traumatize him, so we both agreed to stop for the day and reevaluate how he was doing in 1 week. A calmer, although slightly rattled Greg came back 1 week later with a story to tell. He recounted a vivid dream he had about his childhood. Something he hadn't thought about in 50 years ended up front and center in his dream/nightmare the night after I saw him last. He didn't quite know what to make of the emotional experience, but he did admit that his back was feeling slightly better this week. He trusted me, and he was game to try it again, but he made no promises about how many points he would let me treat. He took off his pants, looked at the table with a "I don't like you and you don't like me" kind of look, and proceeded to lay on his side ready for a needle. This time he managed to allow me to release 3 muscles on each of his hips and only jumped off the bed twice while trying to act tough. I convinced him to let me release a few muscles in the small of his back, explaining they are much smaller and he would experience a much less intense feeling than with his hips. He reluctantly agreed, and the result was interesting. Your low back has a segmental muscle on either side of your spine called the lumbar multifidus, which acts like a deep spinal stabilizer and is usually the muscle you want to stretch but can't get at when your back is tight. Overactivation of the lumbar multifidus compresses the joints of the low back and can limit a person's normal movement. I think Greg's multifidus had been tight for the past 50 years. IMS gives the practitioner the ability to access these muscles by directly inserting a small needle beside the spine, causing the multifidus to reactively tighten further, followed by a reflexive relaxation. Normally, a person will feel a moderate squeeze in their low back and then notice more mobility in their back when they stand up. But there wasn't much that was normal about Greg. I needled his L45 multifidus with him laying face down on the bed, and just as I pulled the needle out, we both heard a loud pop like a chiropractor had just cracked his back. That was the first and only time I have seen that happen, but it let something go in Greg that gave him a new lease on life. Greg hated IMS, but he came back once a week specifically for me to poke needles in him. Some days he could tolerate more, and some days less, depending on how worked up he was. But I watched his decades-old back pain melt away in a few months, even though his x-rays still showed his spine and hips were as degenerated as ever. His pain was driven by his intense emotional states where his subconscious bracing patterns, coupled with the physical stresses of hitting a small ball as hard and far as he could. His stress was part of his pain, and his pain was part of his stress, and his golf game became a metaphor for his life. After 15 years of seeing him 3 to 4 times every couple years, I saw him grow in some respects and stay the same in others. He gained a lot more understanding about why his back hurt, when to seek help, and what he could do for himself, which gave him more control over how he felt stress in his body. To be clear, I did not fix Greg's back, but I did help him manage it, and did help him hit the golf ball 300 yards as a 60-year-old man with a lot of issues to work through.